The B-29 Superfortress was the most advanced heavy bomber of World War II, capable of flying higher and farther than any bomber before it, and carrying massive bomb loads across the Pacific to strike Japan. It delivered both the firebombing campaigns and the atomic bombs that ended the war. However, flying the B-29 was an absolutely terrifying and brutally dangerous experience, with crews facing constant mechanical failures, enemy defenses, and the crushing psychological weight of what they were ordered to do. Today, we will describe the extreme dangers faced by B-29 crews, why flying this aircraft was so horrifying, and the extraordinary toll experienced by these airmen, many of whom carried the burden for the rest of their lives. When the B-29 entered service in World War II, it was a revolutionary aircraft. It had pressurized crew compartments, remote-controlled gun turrets, and could fly at altitudes above 28,000 feet. But for the 11-man crew, every mission was a journey into hell, facing engines that could catch fire without warning, impossible distances across the Pacific, and the knowledge of what their bombs would do to cities below. The B-29 was designed to reach Japanese home islands that sat far beyond the range of existing bombers. The Pacific distances were vast, weather unpredictable, and forward bases were small coral islands. The Army Air Forces demanded an aircraft that could fly higher, farther, and keep crews alive during missions lasting 15 hours or more. The aircraft carried its crew in two pressurized compartments, one in the nose and one in the tail, connected by a narrow tunnel over the bomb bays. Pressurization meant crews could breathe at high altitude without oxygen masks. 4 Wright R3350 engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower, pushed the bomber above 28,000 feet. It carried thousands of gallons of fuel and had 2 bomb bays capable of carrying up to 20,000 pounds on short missions. However, the aircraft had a terrifying vulnerability. The Wright R3350 engines had a deadly tendency to overheat and catch fire, especially during heavy takeoffs from tropical bases. Engine fires on takeoff were catastrophic because the aircraft were loaded with fuel and bombs, and crews were too low to bail out safely. Many crews died in flames on their own runways before ever reaching Japan. The second prototype suffered an engine fire during testing, crashed into a factory, and killed the entire test crew and people on the ground. This tragedy drove design changes, but it could not eliminate the problem. Throughout the war, crews feared their own engines as much as enemy defenses. Now let us explain the greatest dangers these crews faced, and we will start with the early operations and why they were so devastating. The first missions in 1944 flew from India through forward bases in China. Every gallon of fuel and bomb had to be transported across the Himalayas. Crews called this route the Humper, and the operation was unsustainable. Bombers burned most fuel just reaching China, and Japanese raids destroyed supplies and airfields. On June 15, 1944, B-29 Superfortresses struck Japan for the first time since the Doolittle raid. The target was Yawata Steelworks. The raid proved Japan was within reach, but damage was minimal compared to the effort required. In November 1944, a reconnaissance B-29 over Tokyo encountered winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. They had discovered the jet stream. For high-altitude bombing, this was devastating. Bombs were blown miles off target. Fuel calculations became meaningless. Some crews never made it home, forced to ditch when headwinds exhausted their fuel. The capture of the Mariana Islands in mid-1944 changed everything. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam became the largest bomber bases in history. From the Marianas, every Japanese city was within range. But the jet stream problem remained, and high-altitude bombing continued producing poor results. In January 1945, General Curtis LeMay took command and immediately abandoned the original strategy. Instead of high-altitude formations, he ordered low-altitude night attacks by individual bombers. Defensive guns were stripped out except the tailgun. The weight saved was filled with fuel and incendiary bombs. If high-altitude bombing did not work, the solution was simple. Fly low under the jet stream, carry more bombs, and set entire cities on fire. The weapon was the M69 incendiary, a small cylinder filled with napalm. Dozens were packed into clusters and scattered over cities, crashing through wooden roofs and bursting into flames. Japanese cities built of wood and paper were perfect targets for firebombing. On the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, over 300 B-29s flew over Tokyo at altitudes of only 5,000 to 9,000 feet, each loaded entirely with incendiaries. They laid their bombs in a massive X pattern across the city, then spread out to cover the rest. What followed was the single deadliest air raid in history. In just a few hours, 16 square miles were reduced to ashes. Over 90,000 people were killed. 1 million were left homeless. More than 250,000 buildings were destroyed. People leaped into canals and reservoirs to escape the flames, but the water itself boiled from the immense heat. More civilians died in Tokyo that night than in either Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Tokyo was only the beginning. City after city was subjected to the same treatment. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, and dozens more were systematically burned. By August, 66 Japanese cities had been firebombed, and 40% of Japan's urban area was destroyed. Millions were homeless. The civilian death toll was beyond comprehension. For B-29 crews, the psychological weight was crushing. They were not attacking military bases or factories in isolation. They were burning entire cities filled with families and children. The justification was that Japanese war production was dispersed into small workshops throughout the cities. Destroy the cities and you destroy the war effort. But the airmen knew what they were really doing. The guilt and trauma stayed with many for the rest of their lives. Beyond the horror of what they were ordered to do, crews faced constant danger from their own aircraft and the enemy. When a B-29 was hit by anti-aircraft fire or suffered engine failure, the crew had two survival choices: ditch in the ocean or bail out over Japan. Neither promised survival. Ditching in the ocean gave crews some chance. Each man carried a one-man raft, emergency supplies, and a small radio. Submarines patrolled near target areas waiting to rescue survivors. Sometimes it worked and crews were home the next morning, but other times storms scattered rafts. Men drifted too close to Japanese-controlled islands, or rescue never arrived. Many B-29 crews simply vanished into the Pacific. Bailing out over Japan was far worse. Captured crews were not treated as prisoners of war. Japanese authorities branded them war criminals because of the firebombing. Interrogations were brutal. Some were held in city prisons and killed by American bombs during raids. Others faced medical experiments that were horrific beyond description. After the war, most responsible never faced justice. Then came the atomic bombs. The B-29 aircraft that dropped them were specially modified. Gun turrets were stripped and bomb bays were rebuilt. On August 6th, Hiroshima was destroyed instantly. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered the same fate. Tens of thousands died immediately. Many more died slowly from radiation. Among the dead were Allied prisoners who had survived being shot down, only to be killed by atomic bombs. The statistics tell a grim story. Hundreds of B-29 Superfortresses were lost during the war. Thousands of airmen died in engine fires, ditching accidents, combat losses, and in Japanese captivity. The crews who survived carried psychological scars that never healed. They had flown the most advanced bomber in the world on missions that killed more civilians than any other campaign in history. Despite all these horrors, B-29 crews climbed into their aircraft mission after mission. If you're interested, we can cover the missions of these exceptionally brave airmen in more detail in future videos, so make sure to subscribe.